everybody. I had a few stolen moments and it'd been a while, so I decided to come on and share a story. It's Mental Health Month, and we're winding down season 3 on being unnormal. And I just posted a memory where last year this time I was kind of like, does anybody know how to do a podcast? So, it just goes to show you what a difference a day makes, and what a difference a year makes, and what a difference time makes, right? What we are dealing with today can be alleviated over time. And I don't say that very flippantly. I wanted to come on here. We did a live event almost 2 weeks ago now, and we picked the topic of shame and guilt. I talked about shame on season 1, and hey, Elizabeth, I talked about shame on season 1 because shame has so many touch points into people's lives. But really today I wanted to talk about how shame affects mental health in particular. We didn't go into great detail about that during the podcast, and I wanted to share a personal story of how stigma has affected us, and how, especially my daughters, and how now, I guess you could say that we get the last laugh, right? Because we've used our shame as now our story and in our power. So when my daughter was in crisis a few years ago, she missed a lot of school. She missed the majority of her middle school experience, and she missed a good, solid year and a half, at least, of middle school due to her psychiatric crisis. She couldn't make it to school, and that's really, really common. One of the things that I see parents struggling with a lot is, I can't get my kid to school. And I think one of the pieces that we need to look at is forcing children to go to school, and why we do that, and giving ourselves permission to let it be okay if our child needs to stay home if they're not emotionally stable enough to send to school. That's a whole separate situation and conversation I could be having about that. I made the choice to allow my daughter to be home. She was not functional enough to be able to get to school. And one of her friends was struggling at the same time and knew our story and knew the more kind of intimate details about what was happening. I live in a small community, so it wasn't like it was a big secret. My daughter had missed a significant portion of school, but anybody that was, kind of in that circle, her circle, really saw what was happening. It was that, not that she was just missing school, but she was missing school for psychiatric reasons. And this child disclosed to me in a conversation we later had about suicide, and her suicide attempts, was that her father had said to her, "Oh, you don't want to end up like my daughter, right? You need to go to school." When this child was starting to exhibit symptoms of crisis, it was that child's father who used my daughter as an example of what not to be. You don't want to end up like her. She hasn't gone to school in so long. Hey, Christy. Hi, sweetheart. And so my daughter has been used, and this wasn't the first time my daughter had been used as an example. So parent your kids talk, number one. And number two, my daughter was used as a threshold of what not to be. This, instead of looking at their child and saying, what is happening in my home, and how can I be engaging in a different way that's going to be most advantageous for my child? My child was used as an example and thrown under the bus, right, to be some kind of a warning. And unfortunately for that other child, there were several, I think the last count was 6, 7 suicide attempts for that child, because the parent would rather not look at the situation for what it was and look at some deeper truths in their family systems. Instead, it was much easier to throw my child as under the bus and as an example of what not to do. And I think some of that is just our natural defense mechanisms kicking in. We don't nobody wants to, see that their child is hurting. There's denial factors and protective measures that come into place, and that's part of how we survive as humans to a certain extent. But what that does is send messages, right? If we look at how stigma and how shame is created, if we are using this as an example, and then that child ends up having a severe psychiatric crisis, which is exactly what happened, then this child has been taught this messaging that having a psychiatric crisis is bad and shameful, and you are not you're not a worthy person if you can't deal with your emotions and behavior, right? You're less than, right? You're somebody to be looked down upon and somebody to be judged ultimately. So if you're getting that information from your parent, you're going to embody that. You're a child. That you're learning. That's the behavior that's being modeled to you. And then you operate from that place of shame. And when you're operating from that place of shame, all of these really negative emotions and eventually negative behaviors and habits and negative coping strategies come into play to try to reconcile the fact that my father thinks I'm a shameful person. And that's what this child believed and still struggles with. Now, I was very lucky, but it came through a lot of hard work to understand what was happening during that crisis, to fight school systems, to fight doctors, to advocate for her care. It was very difficult. A lot of people said, I should just make her go to school. I should just do this. And if it was so easy to just do these things with our children that are in crisis or anybody that's in a psychiatric crisis, trust me, we would. If we would just discipline our kid more, if we would just use better consequences, if it, shoulda, woulda, coulda, if you just did this. And what that really tells me now is that your ego really is very good at predicting outcomes you know nothing about, right? And because the solution becomes empathy and love, not punishment. Trust me, if we could spank the ADHD out of our kids, I think there would be no children in the United States with ADHD if it was that simple, right? We want to find a simple solution, but it's not. It's complex. There's layers, right? So I was lucky that I was able to change my parenting style and adapt my parenting style to be able to help my child. It was a difficult situation. And, I am very, very lucky also that my daughter was able to let go of those preconceived notions, and that other parent's opinion was not her problem. She didn't internalize that. And I'm very, very grateful for that. She has a strength. She doesn't care what other people think of her because she accepts and knows herself and her disease and her illness and her process for what it is. And then that's level of acceptance and love ultimately, and empathy that she has for herself, knowing what her challenges are. And then eventually getting to a place where now we use this story as an example of what happens when stigma prevents you from looking at the signs for what they are in your child when they're struggling. And that shame that will prevent and become a barrier to care, right? Especially when we talk about children, because children do not have the ability to go and get treatment for themselves. They depend on a adult to drive them to those appointments. They depend on the adult to figure out the insurance and all the adult stuff that comes along with who's my insurance provider, how do I get behavioral health services, how do I get to my appointments, and do I just need a therapist? Am I going to need a psychiatrist or someone to manage my meds, and what's that? There's so many different components and systems that come in online when we're dealing with the mental health system. And children rely on their parents to be able to navigate that for them and help them interact with those systems. So if you have a parent who is ashamed of these mental health issues in their home and in their child for various different reasons, that child then does not have access to care. And it was very important for me to make sure that I could be an advocate for my child to get her access to care. And now we see these rising suicide rates. And someone had posted on the Being Unnormal page, why are we seeing these upticks? right? Why are the stats rising? And that it's a complex answer, but one of the answers that's very easy to talk about is we talk about it now more, and that's because of the fight against stigma and the reduction of stigma. And that's why that's so important. And I know that there's this kind of battle right now, if you will, I'm going to say the word battle, within the mental health community, when we have people with what are considered to have what's called SMIs, or serious mental illness, then we talk about bipolar, schizoaffective disorder, that, going into psychopathy, and that spectrum of mental illness versus what we call mental health issues, which is, just, some like minor depressive, not like a reoccurring depressive syndrome, general anxiety, things that are considered as severe. So there's these two camps in the mental health community. You've seen a lot of information out there about fighting stigma, lots of hashtags, Project Semicolon, and Stop Stigma, and Stigma Free, and all this stuff. Well, the SMI community has gotten very upset because all that marketing campaign has gotten funding, and it's taken away funding from this SMI camp that they could have been using to house people with schizoaffective disorder, or to help people with bipolar get jobs. There's all these really cool things that they could have been doing, right? I get that. But what makes me a little sad is it minimizes the effect, I think, that stigma really does have. And I've seen this up close, where the stigma in the family unit prevented a child from getting the care that they needed. And then you had multiple suicide attempts, right? Now you have what was probably a general anxiety disorder and some depression that you could have nipped in the bud. Now you have major depressive episodes. You have now the trauma of not being able to get care and go through this process with your parents. Now it's probably activating a dormant mood disorder. Things get worse, right? Things can get worse if we don't address stigma. Hello, everybody that has joined. Hello. When we don't talk about stigma and we don't understand the effects of stigma, and then we look at the rising suicide rates within our youth, and we look at the rising depression and anxiety rates in our youth, it is so critical for us to understand that stigma is a huge problem still. And, when I look at like the online groups that I'm in, even within those communities, and even within the parents that have children with these diagnoses, they're still struggling with what they think they should be doing. And a lot of that is the residue of stigma, right? And it changes, and it creates parenting styles that can be really ineffective for children that have a diagnosis, especially on the severe side of the house. I opted to keep my child out of school. And when my child calls me and is having a massive anxiety attack, and we've gone through our coping skills and we've done what we needed to do, it's okay for me to go pick my kid up from school. I have to be able to allow myself and allow my child to have the space to put their mental health first as a priority, be able to express needs. And I can't care if anybody agrees with me. I can't care if the teachers agree with me. I can't care if the school board agrees with me. I can't care if her doctors agree with. I have to do what I feel is in the best interest of my child, knowing my child as intimately as I do, right? And sometimes I've gone toe to toe with providers because I, as the parent, felt a certain way about their treatment, and I was absolutely okay to advocate. If I'm operating in shame, I will be operating in silence, and I cannot serve my child in the best capacity that I could if I was operating in shame and letting stigma tell me and dictate how to parent my child. It's a very fine line. It's a very fine line. It's hard enough to be dealing with any mental health issue, and it's very hard to deal with any serious mental health issue. Anybody who has been affected by a loved one that has watched somebody that they love or experienced themselves mental health issues, we know, you're dealing with depression. You can't get out of bed. Shame tells you that you're worthless, that you're a bad person because you have depression. You would never think that you're a bad person if you had cancer or diabetes. If you were exhausted from a chemo treatment and you couldn't get out of bed, would you internalize that? Yet we look at people who have chemo and they can't get out of bed and we call them heroes. We have people that are dealing with major depressive disorders and they can't get out of bed and we call them lazy. That's what stigma does. Stigma separates the brain stuff from the body stuff. Stigma says you should be able to deal with this, right? You know, you pull yourself up by the bootstraps, right? Shame says that you are a bad person. Guilt says you've done a bad thing. And if you are dealing with something like anxiety and people don't understand really what anxiety is, then you internalize your anxiety to be something to be ashamed of, right? When we talk about therapy, when we talk about, let's say, divorce, a major life event, we talk about these emotional things that are happening to us. I just got laid off, right? It's this shameful thing like, oh, I just lost my job, or oh, I'm going through a divorce, or something of that nature, where we're talking about something that has a huge emotional impact to us. But we don't talk about, my knee's bad and I got to go get some orthopedic surgery. People aren't like, oh, wow, you messed up your knee and you have to get surgery. It's like, oh my gosh, well, let me know if you need any help, right? You don't see that when you have somebody struggling to enter a room and muster all of their courage and use all of their coping skills to just socialize. I know that a lot of people, and I've seen it, people have a hard time interacting with my oldest child because she does have social anxiety. And on top of her social anxiety, she has a mood disorder. So human interactions are really challenging for her. And she can come across very negative, and she can be very awkward in social situations. Now, I keep encouraging her to go into those situations. I keep dragging her out to things that probably make her uncomfortable because I want her to build those skills. She needs to build those skills for life. But I pick and choose my battles. If she's really in a poor mood and she's really exhausted, I have to pick my battles. Okay, I really want you to be here, but I think you need to stay home. So my youngest daughter's birthday is coming up, and we're talking about her birthday and, birthday party, or what do we do? And we may be doing something outside of the home, and my oldest daughter may not want to come. And I know a lot of parents would be like, it's your sibling's birthday. You're going to go. You're going to be there. And this is one of those situations where I really have to make a judgment call of what is in the best interest of both of my children, because there's the person that's affected with the illness or the mental health issue, and then there's the family unit. And those people are also equally affected. My daughter disclosed to me Sunday, went out to breakfast with my youngest daughter, and we were talking about her always going off for sleepovers. And I said, you can have this particular friend come over and spend the night. And she goes, I don't want people coming over to our house. And I said, why? And she goes, because every time I have somebody come over to the house, Sissy gets really upset and agitated, and then you defend me, and then you and Sissy you get into this fight about being able to let me have friends over and let me have space and respect that. And she goes, and I don't want my friends to hear that anymore. Right? That's shame. Shame. I don't want my friends to hear that my sister is sick and she doesn't know how to interact. Right? That's stigma. How will my friends look at me? How will they judge me? Shame, stigma, those are all man-made. Those are society issues. Instead of coming with acceptance and understanding that everybody's brain is different and what happens above the neck is just as important than things that happen below the neck, we have to have different conversations. We have to be able to educate people on some of the truths. Not all, we talk about being individuals, but yet individuals if you align with certain social criteria. You can be an individual if you align in this box of what's socially acceptable. When I think of children that are so scared to tell their parents that they're suicidal that they'd rather just be impulsive and act on that suicidality instead of coming to an adult, because they don't have an adult that they can trust in their life. They don't feel like they can because of the reactions that adult may have. And those reactions are social conditioning that come from shame and stigma. Those prevent care. Those hurt people. So I just wanted to kind of jump on here. It's Mental Health Month. I'm going to be going live a few times this month just to kind of talk about various different things. But I wanted to start this off because we were talking about shame. We had the live event about shame. It's now playing, so you can go to www.beinganormal.com and listen to that. Corey Anta did a great job about that. But, you know, we have to stop comparing our children. We have to stop comparing our own experiences as parents to other people's experiences as parents. We have to understand that we're not going to understand everything. We're not going to have the full picture. When we see children acting out or we see kids behaving in a certain way, we may not know the full picture. And it's okay to have a mental health struggle and have that conversation about it and use that pain as a strength. You know, I was able to help this child who was suicidal. You know, she was able to reach out to me, and I was able to get her to the hospital when she OD'd because I was having these conversations, and I took out the shame. It was, I love you and I care about you. Even though her father thought my daughter obviously was something to avoid and never to be. And I could have been angry when I heard that comment, and now I went, this is a good teachable moment. It's a good teachable moment for me. It's going to be a story that I carry. I would much rather have somebody judge me and think I'm parenting wrong and keep my child alive than do it their way and maybe get it wrong. We have to stop trying to do what we think society thinks is right and do it the way that our hearts tell us. Fuck all those parenting books. You know, if you have somebody in your life and you've ever said to yourself, I wish they could just, or I don't get why they can't. If you had that, I want you to pause the next time that you do that. There's a reason they can't. They won't just be able to. You know, I won't be able to just walk into any social situation with my oldest daughter and her to adapt. She doesn't have that capability, and I have to know that she doesn't have that capability. And I have to respect that, right? And not make her feel bad about that. How do you think shame starts? I can't let her feel bad about her having a mood disorder. It doesn't let her adapt socially. Shit, that's just the way it is. If she's perfectly content to be in her room and play video games till the cows come home and that makes her happy, well, aren't we all in that pursuit of happiness? How many fucking books about positivity and happiness are out there? Right? The struggle becomes when you don't accept what the reality of the situation is, right? And that's mental illness. When we struggle with understanding with what that reality is, because we feel like we have to adapt to others people's, you know, conceptions of that, that's where the problems start. So as I wind down season 3, we've got just a few more episodes left, and I'm ramping into production of season 4. I want to and it's Mental Health Month. I just want to celebrate mental health. You know, I know the strongest people have gone through the darkest shit, and they have a diagnosis, but it doesn't stop them from being who they are. So you remember, next time, you know, you're in a situation or you hear somebody say like, oh God, they should just get over it, things of that nature, you know, what a great opportunity for us to start breaking down stigma by talking about it, right? So I see your guys' comments. I will definitely jump on and give you guys some feedback. And hello, everybody that joined. I'm really glad you joined. Catch this on the replay too. Go back, listen to this. It was quite a long rant, but hopefully you guys were able to take something out of this. Love you all. Thank you for being unnormal with me. I appreciate it. Keep tuning into the podcast. Share the podcast. Help me break down those stigmas and barriers. I'm going to be doing a lot more in the community. I'm actually going to be doing some brown bags. If your company is looking to have discussions about mental health and want to find out how to have those discussions, feel free to contact me at beinganormal@gmail.com. And we're going to be doing some talking on suicidalities in teens next month. I'm really excited. It's a mission. It's a labor of love. So I'll see everybody on the flippy floppy. Have a great day, everyone, and share this video. And as always, take care of yourself and each other. Bye, everyone.